feels great to do my talk straight after Ingrid's talk. We're colleagues, we're both from INUSE, the home of impact mapping, and what Ingrid was just telling you is that user testing is key. If you want to make sure that the thing that you've built actually is creating the impact that you're looking for, you need to test with users. And if you listen to Dave Snowden this morning, he was telling you all about these damn users. I really liked his quote that no one should be asked to talk to user without alcohol. That was quite a nice one. Yeah, and I'll tell you a bit about why that is the case, why users are so bad at describing their needs. So yeah, I work at INUSE. I'm a strategist. I focus on inclusive design and agile development, and I'm really glad to be here at AgileByExample. Me and Ingrid were here 2 years ago and did a workshop, the same workshop that we did this year on Monday. Really glad to be back. Really like this conference. Just a few words of why I'm here today and why I'm going to talk about the things that I really like talking about is that it all started with a huge interest in how the human brain works. How come we're so good at some stuff and we're so terribly bad at other stuff, like describing our needs? I started studying cognitive science. And back then, the best way to put those skills into use was in the field of human-computer interaction. Anybody heard of that? Some of you, yeah, quite a long time ago. From then on, it evolved. People started talking more about usability. Right now, the most common term, I think, is UX, user experience. I'm basically doing the same stuff, which is focusing on how the human brain works and trying to adapt whatever it is we've built to that human brain so that our human brains don't have to struggle too much in adapting to shitty products and shitty systems. So that's where I'm coming from. And when I studied cognitive science, I thought it was really interesting to learn about, human needs and the fact that us as human beings, we really suck at describing our needs. Just as Dave Snowden was telling you, you'd ask those pesky users what they want, and then you'd build it, and then they still wouldn't be satisfied, because then they would have changed their minds. There's a good explanation for this. One of the factors is something called cognitive economy. It's the fact that our brains are always trying to be smart in a way that stuff that we do often, the brain is always trying to automate those processes so that we don't have to spend a lot of economy or effort on them. But that means that it will also be very difficult for us to describe our needs. Imagine, for example, trying to teach your kids how to drive a car. It's really difficult to describe what is happening while you're driving a car, all the different things that you are doing, because your brain has been smart enough to automate all those thought processes. But basically, when we talk about human needs, the iceberg analogy is quite a good one. At the top there we have the explicit needs. Those are needs that we can talk about. Those are the needs that when you go out and interview people, they will tell you about. But that's only the tip of the iceberg. You also have visible needs. Those are needs that you can observe. For example, if I'm looking at you and I'm seeing people, some of you maybe squirming a bit, I might come to the conclusion that, okay, to be able to have a good conference experience, you need comfortable chairs. And maybe these chairs aren't so good for you, but maybe you wouldn't tell me if I asked you about it before the conference. I want comfortable chairs. Maybe not. And where the real exciting stuff happens, is at the bottom. Those are the latent needs. Those are needs that cannot be talked about, cannot be observed, can be explored, but we're not aware of them. And if you get at those needs, then that's where real innovation happens. But that takes some exploring to get at those needs. And since users are so bad at describing their needs, what we need to do is test stuff. Test our hypothesis, test our designs, test our prototypes, test our products and services. And preferably we want to do this in their natural habitat, because in their natural habitat you will discover stuff that you never thought was there. This picture with all these old telephones, this is an office of a person planning home care. I was in her office. I was doing user testing and interviewing her at the same time, testing a new software for planning. And I noticed that she kept getting calls, and she started, reaching for different telephones. And I stopped her and I said, "Okay, how many telephones do you have?" And she started handing them out. It turns out that 5 different telephones that she has to keep track on all day to be able to do her job. And what that tells me is, if we're going to build software for this person, it has to be possible to resume tasks. It has to be possible to pause a task, find that phone, take that phone call, solve that major crisis, and then get back to the system. And I wouldn't have known that if I haven't gone out and met her at her office and seen all those crazy telephones. Since then, since I've studied and I've had a couple of years as a consultant, I've done different kinds of projects with different kinds of products and services. Along those lines, I discovered Agile. And I was thrilled because continuous deployment, continuous delivery meant that we could do early and continuous user testing to make sure that the impact that we were looking for was actually happening in use. So that was great, but I mean, it doesn't stop there. You know that you experience stuff and you get new insights along the way, and I already knew that people are kind of crap at describing their needs, but I noticed also that there was a big difference between different types of users. Not all users could be trusted. Some users were especially bad. Some users would tell me bullshit like, "I love this system," or "this system is my best friend." And then when I would probe them and I would ask them to show me what it was that they were doing, they would show me 3 different types of web browsers. And when I asked them about it, they would say, "Oh, okay, well, I use Internet Explorer to do this, but I can't do that in Internet Explorer when I do the next step, so I have to go over to Chrome, and to see the finished result, I have to go to Firefox." Okay, but you love this system. That doesn't really sound like a healthy relationship, does it? Or when we would do user testing on brand new products, typically testing the understandability. And when we were observing them, we saw that they were clearly struggling. But when we talked to them afterwards, they would say, "Oh, this was really easy." That was very strange. But then I started noticing also that some users were telling us great stuff, were being really honest and really good at describing their needs, saying stuff that, "Well, when I used this web page, that gave me anxiety. I started sweating, I started feeling really bad." And that's awesome, because then you can start talking about what was it that gave you anxiety? Was it something that made you unsure? Was it something that you didn't understand? Or they would say stuff like, "I really didn't understand this. It wasn't easy at all, it was difficult." Or they would be very good at describing, "Okay, but what if you moved that over there, or what if you did this instead?" They would give us great tips on how to improve our products. That's the whole reason of user testing. And I started thinking about, okay, how come these users are so different? And what I found out was that these kind of users that were giving us bullshit, they were average users. If we would try to plot them out on some sort of normal distribution curve, there will be smack in the middle. And those are users who are typically good at getting on with things, but they're not very good at being innovative, being honest, describing their needs. That also has to do with cognitive bias, of course, that Dave Snowden was talking about. But what about these other users? Those are the users that we really want to test on. Who are those? Well, they're extreme users. So if you plotted them on some sort of normal distribution curves, they would be on the outskirts. These would be people that were low performers or high performers, beginners or very experienced ones. Those would be the ones that would give us best feedback when it came to user testing. And when I looked into them, I found that, this designing for extremes has been done many times before, but maybe we're not as aware, and maybe it's more common when it comes to physical products. That when you design for those extremes, you can create stuff that's better for everyone. Like this one-handed faucet. If you ever use those British faucets, with one is red and one is blue, it has hot and cold water, and you can never get the right temperature. From the beginning, this was an accessibility feature made for people with arthritis or weak hands. And it's something that most of us enjoy, because it's really tricky to go on having to fiddle with two different levers. Clothing, the same example. When it comes to outdoors brands, they're usually portraying their clothes like this. You can use it in polar climates. And I come from Gothenburg, and it's on the west coast of Sweden. I see a lot of these clothes, and we're nowhere near the Arctic region, but still, it's great stuff. Personally, I really like climbers' gear, because those jackets, they usually have zippers that go across diagonally so that they don't chafe on my neck like this. So I mean, it has been done. One of my favorite products, it's this watch, and they don't like calling it a watch because you don't have to have eyesight to be able to know what time it is. They're calling it a timepiece. It's the Bradley timepiece. And it's a tactile watch. I'm wearing it right now. You can come check it out later if you want to. It's a tactile watch made for blind people. But what it means for me as a seeing person is that whenever I'm in a meeting, I can easily, very discreetly check what time it is by feeling it. And it gives me another perception of time as well. So it's a great example of designing for extremes, creating something that's good for more people than those for extremes, good for average people as well. And I mean, of course, I could start talking about people who are doing this poorly, but that's not my thing. One of my favorite quotes is, "Look for the helpers." I want to inspire you guys to try this out yourselves. So I'll just give you a few examples of organizations that are doing great stuff when it comes to designing for extremes and designing for neurodiversity. Yahoo! Recently, just a couple of months ago, they launched their neurodiversity program. They're calling it Minds of All Kinds, saying that we need minds of all kinds to do great stuff at Yahoo. And that's totally true. I mean, the notion of neurodiversity is the fact that stuff that we would maybe call ADHD or autism is part of the natural variation of our human brains. Because those people in that bulge in the middle of the normal distribution curves, they're great at getting on with stuff. But to evolve as a human species, we need people with those specialist skills, attention to detail, being innovative, thinking outside of the box, being hyper-aware, being able to hyper-focus, being able to just focus on one very small task for 15 years. That's not something neurotypical people do very well. You need extremes. You need neurodiverse people for those type of tasks. Microsoft, last year, they launched an autism hiring program because they realized that you need that kind of neurodiversity to be able to create better stuff. They're seeing the potential of those people. And I mean, basically, they're onto something. If we're going to try to make our world a better place, I mean, we need minds of all kinds. All the minds that are not put into use are basically waste. So it's really exciting to see this kind of development. My third example is a Danish example. They're called the specialists or specialisterne. I don't speak very good Danish. I'm Swedish. They sound like they have porridge in their mouths. They've been along since 2009. They're collaborating with big corporations like SAP and IBM and Lego, of course, because they're Danish, helping them to recruit people with autism that are typically very good at software testing, some of the best, with that attention to details that some people with autism tend to have. And, of course, what I really love about this conference is that it's called by example. So now we're getting to that bit. I'm just not going to be theoretical with you guys. I'm going to show you something, how it's actually done. So this is smart user testing by example. How should you do it? Basically, user testing, you don't have to test with that many people. One of the old UX usability gurus, Jacob Nielsen, has done lots of research showing that with only 5 users, you can typically find about 80% of the problems. So for each test, about 5 users. That's what we do, and that's usually enough for every iteration. Of course, the next time when you make changes, you need 5 preferably new people to test it on, of course. But yeah, test with about 5 people. Include people that are extreme in some way or another. I'm sure you have extreme users of your services. It might be someone that's very young, someone that's very old. It might have to do with neurodiversity. It may have to do with skills, someone who's a beginner or someone who's very experienced, an expert user. And preferably, test in the user's natural habitat, because that will give you insights that you wouldn't have gotten in any other way. And that's not always possible. I mean, example, when we're working with medical technology, you can't just waltz into a hospital and start testing away because, you know, patient security and all that. But still, if it's possible, and if you're creating software used in an office, that shouldn't be a problem for you. Okay, I'm going to tell you about a case that we did. I'm not into economy at all, but we got an assignment working with the economic processes in the city of Gothenburg. And with our take on it, I mean, of course, we thought about, you know, are there any design elements that we could use here? And it turns out that the invoices that the city of Gothenburg kept sending, many people were misunderstanding them. And for many participants, or for many of the inhabitants of the city of Gothenburg, the invoices were the only way that you communicated with your city. And that means those are really important, that they are designed in a good way, so that we help our citizens, and also that we help our different units in the city. Because whenever someone pays too much or too little, that ends up being a huge problem, requiring loads of administrative tasks. So what we did 2 rounds of user tests, 5 in each, and in those groups were people aged 20 to 80 years old. We had people with perfect sight as well as people with severe sight impairment. We had people who were neurotypical, average brains, and also extreme brains. A person with ADHD and one with Asperger, who's a kind of high-functioning autism. And we also had users who spoke different languages. Because this is what a city looks like. You have people of different ages, different abilities and disabilities, and different nationalities, of course. What the great things about this type of setup was that we got great feedback on contrast and wording. And those are things that you may seem like not a big deal, but they are a big deal. When it comes to the words you're using, it has to be direct, it has to be straightforward, but you don't want it to be threatening. And you want to make it easy for all the citizens to handle their invoices correctly, because they gain from it and the city gains from it as well, because it's money in. When people misunderstand and don't pay their invoices, I mean, the city suffers from that, of course. And when it came to understanding navigation, that was very good, especially those people with the persons with ADHD and Asperger were very good at describing how they navigated. Because you want, when people get an invoice, either they get it as a piece of paper or they handle it digitally. Lots of people in Sweden handle all their invoices digitally, so they only look at it on a screen. And you want people to zoom in on the most important thing. And the most important thing is how much money is it and when does it have to be paid. You don't want them strolling around looking at different stuff, getting confused about where am I supposed to look, where is the important data. So we got great feedback on that. And like I said, people who aren't neurotypical are typically very good at coming up with ideas on where to put things. I didn't like that placement there. Why? Because it seemed like that was part of that information and I didn't understand it. Okay, where would you put it? I would put it there. Okay, great. We found those stuff out in the first test session, then we implemented changes, and then we could verify in the second test session that they were working. And we saw huge improvements on stuff like how fast they were at grasping the information, how safe they felt, that they had actually understood it correctly, and also just the main vibe of how this information was perceived. Another example I just want to share with you. I'm doing lots of reference to Dave Snowden. I realized that. I'm really glad I came after him and I could point back to what he was talking about. Election processes. Oh man, do the US have shitty election processes. There's this great group in the US called the Center for Civic Design. One of their managers is called Dana Chisnell. She's fantastic. They were doing a project called the Anywhere ballot. You know, those voting ballots. There's been quite a lot of talk about the American voting ballots because people misunderstood them. They were so poorly designed that people were voting for the wrong candidates. And that's just crazy. And what they were doing when they were doing research for the Anywhere ballot was that they were looking at people with low literacy. And she came away from this research thinking, okay, but man, we should do this for everything. Because when we're designing for low literacy, we're also designing for, you know, someone who's sleep deprived, whose kids have been sick all night screaming, people with disabilities, people who are stressed out. I mean, we're all cognitively challenged. Some of us more often than others. But you know, PMS, sleep deprived, drunk, hungover, allergic, hungry, sleepy, whatever. And when you're designing stuff that needs to be handled by everyone, you need to test it with extreme users to make sure that you create something that works for everyone. And this is also called universal design. It's a kind of tricky way to, I don't really like that concept. It sounds like you're designing something for aliens, but you could look it up if you want to know more. It's called universal design. That notion that designing for extremes will create something that's better for everyone. Doesn't have to be difficult. 5 users. Think about what your extreme users are. Think about what kind of impact it is you're looking for, and just start testing. These slides, I'll post them on Twitter. They will be available on SlideShare. And feel free to contact me if you have any questions about inclusive design and agile developments, because those are my 2 favorite subjects in the whole world. Thank you.
I have a question about the samples, or about the sample size. So I know that's a rule by thumb, like 5 people, 80% of the issues.
Yeah.
But then you have like all those factors, like different languages, different, like from Asperger.
Yeah.
Won't you need more people to, like, that you have one older guy with Asperger, one younger guy with Asperger, or won't you miss out on a lot of possibilities there with just 5?
That's great. I mean, if you have time and money to test with more, you should definitely do that. I'm used to being in settings where I have huge constraints when it comes to budget and time, and then I have to be practical about it. And we also had the advantage that one of our older users also had Asperger's, and the person that spoke English also had a sight impairment. So we were able to get super extreme users, and I mean that might be rare, of course. But I mean, of course. But what I would think, if you have the time and the money, do more of those tests. So that it isn't too much of a stepping stone to get started. Because testing with 5 users, it doesn't seem like a problem. And once you get started testing, you want to continue.